Welder helps boy in wheelchairs without knowing he's the son of a billionaire. Frank Miller was focused on his welding when he heard a strange noise at the entrance of his workshop. Lifting his mask, he saw a scene that left him speechless. A small boy, no more than 3 years old, was struggling to push a broken wheelchair. "Uncle, can you fix it?" the child asked in a sweet voice, pointing to the crooked, noisy wheel. Frank looked around, searching for the boy's parents, but no one was there. Maple Street in the Newtown neighborhood of New York City was busy at that time of morning, but no adult seemed to be looking for the child. "Where are your parents, little one?" Frank asked, crouching to the boy's height. "Daddy works a lot. Mommy left," the boy replied matter-of-factly, as if it were normal. The welder felt a pang in his chest. After 15 years working in that small shop, he'd seen it all, but never a child so young alone with a broken wheelchair. "How did you get here?" "I saw you from the window. You make pretty noise," the boy said, mimicking the sound of welding. Frank realized the boy was talking about the sparks that flew when he welded. The shop was on the ground floor of an old building, and the windows faced the street. Anyone passing by could see the work through the bars. "What's your name?" "Ethan," the boy answered, trying to climb onto the chair by himself. "Let me help you, Ethan," Frank said, carefully lifting the child into his arms. As he examined the wheelchair, the welder noticed it was an expensive model, very different from the ones he usually fixed. The metal was high quality, but the weld on one of the wheels and the brake mechanism were damaged. "This will take a little while to fix. Are you sure you can stay here?" Ethan nodded eagerly, fascinated, as Frank prepared the equipment. The welder put on his mask and got to work, noticing from the corner of his eye that the boy watched every move with rapt attention. Sparks danced in the air as Frank welded the wheel support. Ethan clapped at each spark as if it were a private show. When he finished the first part, Frank lifted his mask and smiled at the boy. "Did you like it?" "It's magic," Ethan exclaimed, his eyes shining. Frank laughed. It had been a long time since anyone showed such genuine interest in his work. Most people just dropped off their items and left. "Want to see how it works up close?" The boy nodded excitedly. Frank grabbed 2 small pieces of metal and a child-sized mask he'd made years ago for school demonstrations. "Watch, Ethan. When I join these 2 pieces like this, they become friends forever." He placed the small mask on the boy and turned on the equipment. The sparks began to dance again, and Ethan fell completely silent, mesmerized. Just then, Mrs. Wilson appeared at the shop door. She owned the bakery next door and always kept an eye on the street. "Frank, whose child is this? He showed up alone with a broken wheelchair, said his dad works a lot and his mom left." Mrs. Wilson lowered her voice and stepped closer. "That boy must be from the mansion up on the hill. Yesterday I saw a black van going up there with a wheelchair just like this one." Frank glanced at Ethan, who was still playing with the small metal pieces he'd given him. "The mansion on the hill? The one with the tall gate and security?" "The very one. They say a very wealthy businessman lives there. I've never seen him, but Jane's daughter works at a fancy toy store and said they've sold things to his house that cost more than my yearly salary." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot since we're just starting out. Now, continuing. Frank finished adjusting Ethan's wheelchair and tested all its functions. The wheel spun perfectly, the brake worked well, and he had added a few details to make it easier for such a small child to use. "All done, Ethan. Your chair is as good as new." The boy walked up to the chair and climbed in by himself, something he couldn't do when he first arrived because of the equipment's issues. "Thank you, Uncle Frank. How do you know my name?" Ethan pointed to a small, rusty sign on the workshop wall that read, "Miller Welding, Frank." "You can read?" "A little. Grandma Margaret taught me." Frank wondered who this grandmother was, since Ethan had mentioned his mother was gone and his father worked too much. "Ethan, where do you live? I'll take you home." "You don't have to, Uncle. I know the way back. But you're too little to walk alone on the street." "I do it all the time. No one notices when I leave." The answer worried Frank. How could a 3-year-old slip out of the house without anyone noticing? "Can I come back tomorrow?" asked Ethan. Of course, but only if someone brings you. I'll come by myself. Bye, Uncle Frank. Before the welder could stop him, Ethan wheeled himself down the sidewalk. Frank ran after him, but the boy was faster than he looked. By the time he reached the corner, Ethan had already disappeared. Mrs. Wilson shook her head. That child worries me. Something's bound to happen one of these days. I'm worried too. I'll keep an eye out if he shows up again. The next day, around 10 in the morning, Frank heard the familiar sound of Ethan's wheelchair once more. This time he was ready. Good morning, Uncle Frank. Good morning, champ. How'd you get here? I came down the hill. It's easy. And no one at home knows you're here? Ethan shook his head. Daddy's traveling again. Nancy's asleep. Who's Nancy? She takes care of me, but she sleeps a lot after she takes her medicine. Frank realized something wasn't right. A caregiver who slept during the day and let a 3-year-old wander off alone wasn't doing her job. Ethan, do you eat breakfast? Sometimes, when Nancy wakes up. The welder's heart sank. He went to Mrs. Wilson's bakery and bought a sweet roll and a glass of milk. Here, kiddo, eat this while I work. Ethan ate hungrily, suggesting he really was starving. Meanwhile, Frank welded some pieces and watched the boy. Uncle Frank, can you teach me the magic of the sparks? It's dangerous, Ethan, but I can teach you other things. Frank grabbed some colored wires and started showing Ethan how to make simple shapes. The boy had surprising skill for his age. You're really smart, you know? Grandma Margaret says that too. Where is your grandmother? She lives far away. She visits sometimes, but Daddy doesn't like it much. Why not? They fight. I don't understand the words they say, but they get mad. Frank was piecing together an increasingly troubling picture. An absent father, a mother who had gone away, a neglectful caregiver, and a grandmother kept at a distance. Over the next 2 weeks, Ethan showed up at the workshop almost every day. Frank started buying extra snacks for the boy and taught him little tricks with metal. Ethan learned to bend wires, make small sculptures, and even recognize different types of metal. Uncle Frank, why don't you have kids? The question caught the welder off guard. He stopped what he was doing and sat on an old crate next to Ethan. I had a son once. Where is he? He went to live with his mother far from here. Why? Because I wasn't being a good daddy back then. Ethan processed the information with the seriousness only children can have. But you're good to me. Thank you, Ethan. That means a lot to me. Do you miss him? Every day. I miss my mom too. Do you remember her? A little. She smelled nice and sang to me. Frank felt the urge to hug the boy but held back. There were boundaries he needed to respect. That same day, after Ethan left, Frank decided to discreetly follow to see where the boy lived. His curiosity and concern had been growing each day. Ethan climbed the steep hill leading to the most expensive neighborhood in town. The houses grew larger and farther from the street. At the top of the hill, Ethan stopped in front of a massive wrought iron gate. Frank hid behind a tree and watched. The boy pressed something on the wall. The gate opened automatically and he walked in. From outside, only the top of a huge mansion was visible among the trees. My God, Frank murmured. Mrs. Wilson was right. On his way back, the welder couldn't stop thinking. If Ethan lived in a mansion like that, why did he show up at the shop hungry? Why did no one know where he was for hours? The next morning, Ethan arrived later and seemed sad. Uncle Frank, today's my birthday. Really? How old are you? 4. And how's the party going to be? Ethan lowered his head. There's no party. Daddy had to travel again. He said we'd celebrate when he gets back, but he always forgets. Frank felt a mix of anger and sadness. No matter how much money that man had, he was failing as a father. You know what we're going to do? We're having a party right here in the shop. Ethan's eyes lit up. Really? Of course. Let Uncle Frank take care of everything. Frank went to Mrs. Wilson's bakery and explained the situation. In less than an hour, she had prepared a small cake and some treats. Mr. Thompson, who owned a discount toy store on the corner, donated a few simple gifts. When Ethan saw the surprise, he cried with joy. No one's ever thrown me a party before. What do you mean, never? The other times Daddy forgot and later bought me an expensive toy, but it wasn't a real party. The impromptu party in the shop was simple but full of warmth. Mrs. Wilson sang "Happy Birthday." Mr. Thompson told jokes, and Frank presented his special gift, a little robot made from scrap metal that moved when Ethan pressed a button. "It's the best present I've ever gotten," the boy exclaimed. "Better than the expensive toys your dad buys?" "Way better, because you made it just for me." That afternoon, Ethan played in the shop later than usual. When he finally left, he hid the robot under his shirt. "Uncle Frank, you won't tell anyone about the robot, right? If Nancy sees it, she'll tell Daddy." "Why would that be bad?" "Because he doesn't like me taking things from strangers." "But I'm not a stranger. I'm your friend." "I know, but Daddy doesn't know you." Frank grew thoughtful. Maybe it was time to introduce himself to Ethan's father, but something told him the conversation wouldn't be easy. Over the next few days, Ethan arrived at the shop telling stories about how the robot kept him company at night. He had created an entire adventure for the robot and even gave it a name: Sparky. "Sparky is my best friend, just like you, Uncle Frank." "That's great, Ethan. Everyone needs friends. Do you have friends?" "A few. Mrs. Wilson, Mr. Thompson, and now you." "I only have you and Sparky. And Grandma Margaret, but she doesn't visit much." The boy's loneliness was clear, and Frank felt more and more responsible for giving him moments of joy and care. One morning, Ethan didn't show up at the workshop. Frank thought it was odd because the boy always let him know when he couldn't make it. By the second day with no word, his concern grew. "Mrs. Wilson, have you seen Ethan?" "No, and I've been wondering the same. That boy is as punctual as clockwork." On the third day, Frank decided to go up to the mansion. He couldn't focus on work anymore, worried something might have happened to Ethan. When he reached the gate, he rang the intercom. A woman's voice answered. "Hello?" "Good afternoon. My name is Frank. I wanted to check on Ethan." "Who?" "Ethan, the boy who lives there." "I don't know any Ethan. You must be mistaken." "No, I'm sure. A 4-year-old boy uses a wheelchair." There was a long pause. "One moment." Frank waited nearly 10 minutes until a middle-aged woman appeared at the gate. She was well-dressed but looked tired. "And you are?" "Frank Miller. I have a workshop on Maple Street. Ethan has been coming by for a few weeks now." The woman, whom Frank guessed was Nancy, grew visibly nervous. "Ethan is sick. He can't have visitors." "Sick how? Does he need anything?" "That's none of your concern. Please don't come back here. I just want to make sure he's okay." "He's fine, but you shouldn't get involved with this family. It's better for everyone." The way she spoke left Frank even more uneasy. Something was being hidden, and he couldn't figure out what. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. In the following days, Frank discreetly asked around the neighborhood. He learned Ethan had been admitted to Mercy General Hospital, one of the most expensive in the city. The information came from a cleaning lady who knew a nurse there. "They say the boy is very withdrawn, won't eat or play with anything," the woman told him. Frank didn't hesitate. He took his savings and bought materials to make another gift for Ethan. He spent the whole night working on a special project, a miniature workshop, complete with a workbench, tiny tools, and even a small welding torch. The next day, he went to the hospital. At reception, he said he was a family friend and wanted to visit Ethan. "Full name of the patient?" the receptionist asked. Frank realized he didn't even know Ethan's last name. "Ethan, the boy in the wheelchair. He's 4. "Oh, you mean Ethan Sullivan Davis, but he only receives visitors authorized by the family." "And how do I get authorized?" "You'd need to speak to the legal guardian." Frank knew that would be impossible, given Nancy's reaction. He decided to try a different approach. He returned to the hospital in the afternoon when it was busier. Watching the nurses, he spotted one who seemed friendlier. He waited for her break and approached. "Excuse me, do you work in the pediatric ward?" "Yes, why?" "I wanted to deliver a gift to a boy staying here, Ethan Sullivan Davis." The nurse, whose badge read Rebecca, studied him carefully. "Are you family?" No, but I'm a friend. He's been coming to my workshop for weeks. I heard he was admitted and wanted to give him this. He showed her the miniature workshop he'd made. Rebecca examined it and was impressed by the details. You made this yourself? Yes. Ethan loves watching me work. I thought this might cheer him up. Look, normally I wouldn't do this, but that boy has been so down. He won't interact with anyone, barely eats. Maybe a gift from a friend will help. Thank you so much. You have no idea how much this means. But make it quick, okay? If anyone finds out, I could be in trouble. Rebecca led Frank through the less crowded hallways until they reached Ethan's room. When she opened the door, Frank saw a scene that broke his heart. Ethan was in bed, very pale and thin, staring out the window with no expression. When he saw Frank, his eyes lit up for the first time in days. "Uncle Frank," he shouted, trying to sit up in bed. "Hey, champ, how are you doing?" "Really upset, no one visits me." "I brought something for you." Frank showed him the miniature workshop. Ethan was delighted, carefully examining every detail. "It's just like the real one. Look, it even has Sparky here." Indeed, Frank had included a tiny version of the robot he had given him as a gift. "Uncle Frank, can you finish the story we started?" "What story?" "The one about the knight who became a welder. Remember?" Frank remembered. It was a story they had made up together during afternoons in the workshop, about a medieval knight who learned the art of welding to fix broken armor. "Of course. Where did we leave off?" The knight had just found out the princess knew how to weld too. Frank began telling the continuation of the story, adapting it to include elements that might give Ethan hope. The boy listened with full attention, smiling for the first time in days. And then the knight said to the princess, "It doesn't matter if the armor is broken, what matters is having the courage to keep fighting," Frank narrated. "Just like me, right, Uncle? Even with my broken chair, I keep trying." "Exactly, Ethan. You're the bravest boy I know." At that moment, the door swung open abruptly. A tall man in an expensive suit and a furious expression entered the room. It was clearly Ethan's father. "Who are you and what are you doing here?" he asked sharply. Frank stood up, staying calm. "My name is Frank Miller. I'm Ethan's friend." "Friend? How do you know my son?" "He's been coming to my workshop for a few weeks." Robert Sullivan Davis, that was the businessman's full name, looked visibly shocked. "Your workshop? What workshop?" "I have a welding shop on Maple Street. Ethan showed up one day with his broken chair and I fixed it." "That's impossible. My son doesn't leave the house alone." Ethan, who had been silent, finally spoke up. "Dad, Uncle Frank is my friend. He teaches me cool things and even threw me a birthday party." Robert looked at his son in surprise. "Birthday party? But I said we'd celebrate when I got back from my trip." "You always say that, Dad, but you always forget." The boy's reply made Robert uncomfortable. He turned back to Frank with renewed anger. "I don't know what your intentions are, but I demand you stay away from my son immediately. My only intention is to be his friend. Ethan is a special kid who deserves attention and care. I don't need advice on how to raise my son, especially from a what? From an honest worker who genuinely cares about your son." The tension in the room was rising. Ethan started to cry. "Dad, please don't fight with Uncle Frank. He's good to me." "Ethan is not allowed to have visitors I don't know. I want you to leave right now." "All right," Frank said, keeping his composure. "But first, I need to tell you something, Ethan." He knelt by the bed. "No matter what happens, always remember you're brave, smart, and special. And if you ever need a friend, I'll be at the workshop." "Uncle Frank, don't go." "I have to go now, but you'll always be in my heart." Frank left the room with a broken heart, hearing Ethan cry behind him. In the hallway, he ran into Rebecca, who had witnessed everything. "I'm so sorry," she said. "I didn't know it would turn out like this. You did the right thing. Ethan needed to know someone cares about him. That man is always like that. I've never seen him show any affection for the boy. What exactly does Ethan have?" "It's a rare condition that affects the muscles in his legs. He could improve with physical therapy and lots of positive encouragement, but his emotional state isn't helping his recovery." Frank Miller absorbed the information. Ethan could have a better life, but he was being held back by the lack of emotional support. In the following days, Frank couldn't focus at work. He kept thinking about Ethan and wondering how the boy was feeling. A week later, he got an unexpected visitor at the shop. An elegant woman with silver hair and gentle eyes appeared at the door. "Are you Frank Miller?" "Yes, Mum. How can I help you?" "My name is Margaret Davis. I'm Ethan's grandmother." Frank immediately understood who she was. "Grandma Margaret, Ethan talks about you all the time. And he talks about you too. I came here because I need to talk to you about my grandson." "How is he?" "Not well. Ever since you were banned from visiting him, Ethan has sunk into a deep depression. He won't eat, won't talk, won't play. The doctors are worried. I'd like to help, but your son forbade me from getting near him." "My son is wrong. He's always been too proud to admit his mistakes." Margaret sat in an old chair in the shop and sighed. "Can I tell you our family story?" "Of course, if you'd like. Robert is my only son. He lost his father when he was 12, and since then, he's become obsessed with work and money. He thinks he can fix everything by buying expensive things. And Ethan's mother? Jennifer was a wonderful girl. They married young and were happy for a while, but when Ethan was born with his condition, Robert panicked. He wanted miracle cures, the best doctors in the world. He spent a fortune on experimental treatments. That doesn't sound bad. It wouldn't be if he hadn't forgotten the most important thing, giving his son love and attention. Jennifer tried to balance things, but Robert was always traveling, always working to make more money for more treatments. So she left. Robert pushed her away, said she was settling, that she didn't want the best for Ethan. He offered her a lot of money to leave their lives and not interfere with his plans. The story helped Frank understand the situation better. "And you?" "I've always been against his behavior. I've always said Ethan needed affection, not expensive treatments. That's why Robert keeps me at a distance too. But you still see Ethan? When I can. I pay Nancy to let me sneak in sometimes." "Is Nancy a good caregiver?" "Nancy struggles with anxiety and takes medication that makes her drowsy. She's not a bad person, but she shouldn't be caring for a child. That's how Ethan manages to leave the house alone." "Exactly. And that's how he found you." Margaret stood and walked around the shop, looking at Frank's tools and projects. "Ethan told me everything you two did here. The stories, the gifts, the birthday party. For the first time in his life, I saw my grandson truly happy. He's a special kid, smart, brave, kind. And he's suffering because he lost the only real friend he ever had." Frank felt a heavy weight on his shoulders. "What do you think I should do?" "I don't know. Robert is stubborn and proud. But maybe if he understood he's hurting Ethan." "Do you think he'd listen to me?" "Honestly, no, at least not now." "At least he's angry and feels threatened." "Threatened by what?" "Because in just a few weeks you did for Ethan what he couldn't do in 4 years. You made him happy." The conversation with Margaret left Frank even more determined to help Ethan, but also more aware of how difficult the situation was. In the following days, he began working on a special project. If he couldn't visit Ethan in person, maybe he could find another way to stay in touch. Using his welding skills, Frank built a brand new wheelchair for Ethan. Not just functional, but customized with details he knew the boy would love. Little secret compartments, wheels that changed color when they spun, a panel with buttons that made different sounds, and even a small picture frame where Ethan could keep photos of his friends. The project took 2 weeks to complete. Frank worked every night after his shift, pouring love and hope into every weld. When it was done, he went to Margaret again. "Grandma Margaret, I made something for Ethan. Could you give it to him?" When Margaret saw the wheelchair, she was moved. "My goodness, what beautiful work. Ethan will be overjoyed." "There's also a little letter," Frank said, handing her an envelope. In the letter he had written, "Ethan, my brave friend. This wheelchair was made especially for you, with all the love in my heart. Every detail was designed to make you smile. Even if we can't see each other anymore, I want you to know you'll always be my little hero. Keep being brave and smart. One day when you're all grown up, maybe you can visit me at the shop again. Your friend forever, Uncle Frank." Margaret delivered the wheelchair and the letter to Ethan during one of her secret visits. According to her, it was the first time the boy had smiled in weeks. He was enchanted by every detail, Margaret recounted. He spent hours exploring all the compartments and buttons, and the letter. He asked me to read it over and over. Even though he couldn't read everything yet, he memorized every word. But the joy didn't last long. Robert discovered the new wheelchair and flew into a rage. He interrogated Ethan about how it had gotten there, and when he found out it was through Margaret and Frank, he exploded. "He forbade Nancy from letting me in and took the wheelchair away," Margaret said, visibly upset. "Said he wouldn't accept charity from strangers." "Where's the wheelchair now?" Locked in his office, Ethan cried for hours. Frank felt a rage he hadn't felt in a long time. He couldn't understand how a father could be so blind to his own mistakes. The next day, he made a drastic decision. He went to Robert Sullivan Davis's office downtown. The building was imposing, all glass and steel, with security guards at the entrance. Frank felt completely out of place in his simple work clothes, but he didn't back down. "I'm here to see Robert Sullivan Davis," he said at the reception desk. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but it's about his son, Ethan." The receptionist made a few calls, and to Frank's surprise, he was allowed to go up. Robert's office was on the top floor, with a panoramic view of the city. When Frank walked in, he saw Robert on the phone, gesturing angrily. "I don't care what it costs. I want the best specialists from the United States here next week," Robert was saying. When he saw Frank, he hung up abruptly. "What are you doing here?" "I came to talk about Ethan. I already told you to stay away from my son, and I came to tell you you're making the biggest mistake of your life." Robert visibly bristled. "How dare you? Ethan is wasting away, and you don't even notice because you're too busy buying expensive treatments to make yourself feel better. I do everything for my son. You do everything for your conscience. Ethan doesn't need American doctors. He needs a father who's actually there. You don't understand. Ethan has a serious condition that requires... What he requires is love, attention, and emotional support. Things money can't buy." Robert stood up from his chair, clearly agitated. "Who do you think you are, giving me advice? A welder who takes advantage of children?" The accusation hit Frank like a punch to the gut. "Takes advantage? I would never. Why else would a man your age be so interested in a wealthy child?" It took Frank a few seconds to process what was being implied. When it sank in, he felt a mix of outrage and sadness. "You've lost touch with reality. Ethan showed up at my shop because he was alone and needed help. I helped him because that's what decent people do. Decent people don't approach other people's children without permission. Decent people don't abandon 4-year-olds to go work abroad. I don't abandon my son. I work to give him the best. The best for him is having a father who's present. Ethan told me you forget every single one of his birthdays. That's none of your business. It became my business the moment Ethan showed up crying in my shop because he had no one to play with." The argument was escalating dangerously. Robert pressed a button on his desk and 2 security guards appeared at the door. "Get this man out of here and don't let him near the building again." "Mr. Sullivan, you're making a mistake you'll regret for the rest of your life," Frank said as he was escorted out. "The only thing I regret is not acting sooner." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing, Frank left the building humiliated and frustrated. He'd tried every approach possible, but Robert seemed determined to keep Ethan away from him. In the weeks that followed, Frank tried to focus on work, but he couldn't stop thinking about Ethan. Mrs. Wilson and Mr. Thompson noticed his sadness. "Frank, you've been so down," Mrs. Wilson observed. "It's about the boy, isn't it?" Mr. Thompson asked. "I can't stop thinking about him. Is he doing okay? Does he still remember me? Does he understand why I can't visit him anymore?" "Children don't forget real kindness," Mrs. Wilson said. "I'm sure he remembers you. But that doesn't help if I can't be there for him." "Sometimes we plant seeds that only grow much later," Mr. Thompson philosophized. His neighbor's wisdom didn't comfort Frank much, but he clung to the hope that somehow things might work out. A month after the confrontation in the office, Frank got an unexpected visitor, a well-dressed young woman who seemed nervous. Are you Frank Miller? Yes, how can I help you? My name is Rebecca Davis. I'm Robert Sullivan Davis's secretary. Frank immediately tensed. What do you want? I came here on my own. He doesn't know. It's about Ethan. What's wrong with Ethan? He's not doing well. After his special chair was taken away, he sank into an even deeper depression. The doctors are worried because he's not responding to treatment anymore. Why are you telling me this? Because I saw your argument in the office, and because I see how much Mr. Sullivan is suffering too, even if he won't admit it. Rebecca sat down and sighed. Can I tell you something? Of course. I've worked for Mr. Sullivan for 5 years. I've seen him hire the best doctors in the world, spend fortunes on medical equipment, build a full hospital room in his home. But I've never seen him simply sit on the floor and play with his son. And now he's desperate because nothing's working. Ethan won't eat, won't speak, won't interact with anyone. The doctors say if he doesn't improve emotionally, his physical condition could get much worse. The news alarmed Frank. What can I do? He's forbidden me from going near him. I don't know. But I thought you should know. Maybe if you had a way to show him that your intentions are genuine. How? Do you have family? Someone who can vouch for your character? Frank thought for a moment. I have a son. He lives in Boston with his mother. Why do they live so far away? Because 10 years ago I was an alcoholic. I lost custody of him when he was 8. And now? Now I've been sober for 8 years. I work honestly, live a simple and quiet life. My son and I talk on the phone, but he lives far away. Jane absorbed the information. Would you mind telling Mr. Robert that? He won't listen to me. Maybe he will if he knows you understand what it's like to lose a child because of your own mistakes. Jane's suggestion made sense to Frank. Maybe sharing his own story could build a bridge with Robert. I'll think about what you said. Thank you. And Mr. Frank? Ethan asks about you every day. Even though he doesn't speak to anyone else, he still whispers your name. The information touched Frank deeply. That night, he made a decision. He called his former father-in-law in Boston and explained the situation. Frank, you want me to talk to this man? Asked Mr. Johnson. I want him to know there are people who can confirm I've changed my life. Of course, son. You turned your life around completely after you stopped drinking. Anyone who knows you can vouch for that. Frank also called his former boss, the priest from the church he attended, and some old clients. He put together a list of references who could attest to his integrity. The next day, he returned to Robert's building. This time, the security guards wouldn't let him up, but he asked Jane to come down to talk. I brought a list of people who can speak about me, he said, handing her a paper with names and numbers. If Mr. Robert wants to look into my past and present, these people can help. Why are you doing this? Because Ethan needs to know he wasn't abandoned by another person who claimed to care about him. Jane promised to give the list to Robert. A few days later, she returned to the workshop. He called everyone on the list, she reported, and he was surprised. Your former father-in-law spoke very highly of you, said you completely recovered from alcoholism and regrets not seeing your son more often. Did Robert call my son too? He did. They talked for almost an hour. What did Michael say? That he misses you but understands why you live apart, that you send money every month even though you don't have to, and that he's proud to have a father who turned his life around. Frank was moved. He hadn't known his son felt that way about him. And what did Robert think of all this? He was confused. He spent the whole night in his office staring at a photo of Ethan. And now? I don't know, he's fighting his own pride. Another week passed with no news. Frank kept working, but his worry for Ethan grew each day. That Thursday, he was welding a railing when he heard a familiar noise at the workshop entrance. He quickly lifted his mask and saw a sight that left him speechless. Robert was standing at the door, pushing the special chair Frank had made. And in the chair was Ethan, very thin and pale, but with eyes shining as he saw the welder. "Uncle Frank!" Ethan shouted, trying to get out of the chair. Frank dropped everything and ran to hug the boy. "Ethan, I missed you so much. I missed you too. I thought about you every day." Frank turned to Robert, who was clearly uncomfortable but not hostile like before. "Thank you for bringing him. Robert nodded, still silent. "Uncle Frank, did you see my new chair? Daddy let me use it again." "I sure did. It looks good on you." Ethan began pointing out all the details of the wheelchair, clearly happy to use it again. His joy was contagious. "Can I play here today?" Ethan asked. Frank looked at Robert, waiting for an answer. For 1 hour, Robert finally spoke. "Thank you." Robert sat on an old box and watched Ethan explore the workshop as if it were his first time, even though he knew every corner. "He hadn't eaten in 2 weeks, Robert said suddenly. "What do you mean?" "Ever since I took his wheelchair away, Ethan stopped eating. Said he wasn't hungry for anything." "And now?" "This morning when I told him we were coming to see you, he asked for breakfast for the first time in weeks." Frank watched Ethan playing with the colorful metal pieces he always set aside for him. "You called my son." "I did. We talked for a long time." "And?" "He helped me understand a few things. Said you're not perfect, but you're a good man who made mistakes in the past and learned from them." Robert paused, watching Ethan show Frank a drawing he'd made on the wheelchair. He also said Ethan was lucky to find you, because not every kid finds an adult who truly cares about them. Your son is very smart. Smarter than his father, apparently. Frank noticed Robert opening up, so he decided to be just as honest. "When I lost custody of my son, I thought I'd die of grief, but I learned that loving someone sometimes means admitting you're not good for them." "How did you change?" "One day at a time, and always remembering I wanted to be worthy of my son's love again." Do you think there's still time for me to be a better father?" The question carried a vulnerability Frank hadn't expected from Robert. "Ethan is 4. You have a whole life ahead of you." "I don't know how to be different. I've always solved everything with money. Start by spending time with him. Real time. No phone, no work, no rush." Robert watched Ethan, who had created a small sculpture with the colored wires. "Daddy, look what I made," Ethan shouted, holding up his creation. "Very nice, son," Robert replied, but Frank noticed he hadn't really looked. "Robert, can I show you something?" Frank walked over to Ethan. "Ethan, can you explain to your dad how you made this sculpture?" "First, I took the blue wire and made a circle. Then I took the red one and made a smaller circle inside. Then I took the yellow one and made little points around it. It's the sun." "Why did you choose to make a sun?" Frank asked. "Because the sun makes everything prettier and happier, just like you make my heart happy, Uncle Frank." Robert listened silently, and Frank saw tears forming in his eyes. "See," Frank said softly, "he has so much to share. He just needs someone to listen." Can I try making a sculpture too?" Robert asked Ethan. "Yes. I'll teach you." Ethan beamed at the idea of teaching his father something. Over the next few minutes, Frank watched father and son working together for the first time. Robert was clumsy with the wires, but Ethan was patient, explaining each step with excitement. When Robert finished his first sculpture, a shape vaguely resembling a house, Ethan clapped as if it were a masterpiece. "It looks great, Daddy. You're good at this." "Thank you, Ethan. You're a great teacher." "Uncle Frank taught me. He says when you teach someone, both people learn." Robert looked at Frank with growing respect. "That's very wise." The hour Robert had set passed quickly. When it was time to leave, Ethan was sad, but not as desperate as before. "Uncle Frank, can I come back tomorrow?" "If your father says yes." Ethan looked at Robert hopefully. "Daddy, we can talk about it at home," said Robert. "Promise we'll really talk about it?" "I promise." Before leaving, Robert approached Frank. "Thank you?" "For what?" "For not giving up on him, for not giving up on me. Everyone deserves a second chance. Some people deserve a third, fourth, fifth. What matters is making the most of the chance when it comes." Robert nodded and left, pushing Ethan's wheelchair. At the door, Ethan waved excitedly. "Bye, Uncle Frank. See you tomorrow." "See you tomorrow, champ." That night, Frank could barely sleep from anxiety. He didn't know if Robert would really let Ethan come back, or if that had just been a disguised goodbye. The next day, around 10 in the morning, he heard the familiar sound of Ethan's wheelchair. This time, though, it wasn't just Ethan. Robert was with him, dressed more casually than the day before. "Good morning, Uncle Frank," Ethan called out. "Good morning, Ethan. Good morning, Robert." "Good morning." Ethan insisted we come back, said he wanted to show me how you work. "Daddy wants to learn how to weld," Ethan announced, beaming. Frank looked at Robert, surprised. "Is that true?" "Well, Ethan said it'd be nice if I knew how to do the same things he likes. I thought maybe—" "Of course. It'd be my pleasure to teach you. Won't it be dangerous?" "We'll start with simple, safe things." For the next 2 hours, Frank taught Robert the basics of welding, while Ethan watched and chimed in with excited suggestions. Robert was clumsy at first, but showed determination to learn. "Daddy, you're getting better," Ethan encouraged. "Thanks, son, it's harder than it looks. Uncle Frank says good things are tough at first, but get easier when you practice with love." "Very wise," Robert agreed, glancing at Frank. During their snack, Robert had brought sandwiches for everyone. The conversation deepened. "Frank, can I ask you something personal?" "Sure." "How do you handle missing your son?" "It's hard, but I've learned that missing someone is the price we pay for having someone special in our lives. And it's better to miss someone we love than to have no one to love at all. Do you think your son forgave you?" "He told me he did. But the hardest forgiveness was forgiving myself." "How so?" "Forgiving myself for wasting so much time, for causing so much pain, for losing precious moments that'll never come back." Robert fell silent, clearly processing the words. "I wasted 4 years of Ethan's life," he finally said. "You didn't waste them. Maybe you didn't make the most of them, but Ethan knows you care about him. Now you can start building better memories." "Daddy, you didn't waste anything," Ethan chimed in, having overheard. "You always gave me nice toys and took me to the doctor when I was sick." Robert was moved by his son's innocence and natural forgiveness. "Thank you, Ethan, but from now on, I want to do more things with you. Things you really love. Like coming here to the shop? Like coming here to the shop." In the following days, Robert and Ethan became regular visitors to the shop. Robert was genuinely interested in learning about welding and metalwork, and Ethan was overjoyed to see his father taking an interest in the same things he loved. Frank noticed a gradual change in Robert. He started asking Ethan's opinion on small things, really listening when the boy spoke, and showing physical affection, something he clearly hadn't done in a long time. "Uncle Frank, my dad's getting cooler," Ethan remarked one day when Robert had stepped out to take an important call. "Why do you think that?" "He hugs me tighter, and yesterday he cancelled a meeting to stay with me." "That's wonderful, Ethan. Your father is learning what really matters." "Like you learned from your son?" "Exactly." When Robert came back from the call, he looked worried. "Everything all right?" asked Frank. "It was about an issue at the company. I'll have to travel to handle it." Ethan visibly got upset. "Again, Dad?" "It's just 2 days, son. I promise." "You always say that, but it always takes longer." Robert knelt down to Ethan's level. "This time will be different, and you know why?" "Why?" "Because now I have a very important reason to come back soon." "What is it?" "To finish learning how to make that robot Uncle Frank started teaching me." Ethan smiled, but still seemed unsure. "Do you really promise you'll come back soon?" "I promise, and I'll bring you a surprise." "What surprise?" "If I tell you, it won't be a surprise." After Robert and Ethan left, Frank grew thoughtful. He hoped Robert would really keep his promise this time. 2 days later, Robert showed up at the workshop alone. "Where's Ethan?" asked Frank. "He's at home, eager to come. But first, I wanted to talk to you." "About what?" "About the surprise I promised him." Robert sat down and took a deep breath. "I reached out to Jennifer." Frank was surprised. It was the first time Robert had mentioned his ex-wife by name. "What do you mean?" "I called her. We talked for hours. I told her about you, about how Ethan has changed, about how I've changed." "And what did she say?" "She cried a lot. Said she never stopped loving Ethan but accepted my money because she thought it'd be better for him to stay away from a mother who couldn't afford expensive treatments." "And now?" "Now she wants to come back. Not for me, but for Ethan." "How do you feel about that?" "I think Ethan needs his mother, and I think I need to prove I've really changed." "How?" I offered for her to move back to New York City. I'll pay for an apartment near our house. Ethan can spend time with both of us, no pressure. That's very generous. It's not generosity, it's justice. I took his mother away out of pride and selfishness. Now I need to make it right. What if it doesn't work out? It will, because now I understand it's not about me. It's about what's best for Ethan. When will you tell him? Today. Jennifer arrives tomorrow. He'll be overjoyed. I hope so, but I'm nervous too. What if he likes her more than me? Robert, love isn't a competition. It's abundance. The more love Ethan gets, the happier he'll be. Did you learn that from your son? I learned it by losing my son, and I learned that real love wants what's best for the other person, even if it means sacrifices for us. Robert nodded, clearly nervous but determined. I'll go get Ethan now. I want to tell him the news here, with you present. Why? Because this is where it all started. This is where I learned to be a real father. 20 minutes later, Robert returned with Ethan, who was visibly excited. Uncle Frank, Dad said he has a very special surprise for me. Really? And what is it? Robert knelt down and took Ethan's small hands. Ethan, do you remember your mum? Ethan's face lit up. I do. She smelled nice and sang to me. Would you like to see your mum again? Can I? Not only can you, but she's coming back to stay close to you. Ethan fell silent for a few seconds, processing the news. Forever? Forever. And you won't be mad? I won't be mad. I'll be happy because you'll have your dad and mum close. Ethan burst into tears of joy and threw himself into his father's arms. Thank you, Dad. Thank you so much. Frank watched the scene with a full heart. Robert had truly changed, and Ethan was about to have the complete family he always deserved. When will I see Mommy? Asked Ethan. Tomorrow. She'll arrive tomorrow. Can I tell Uncle Frank how it was when I see her? Of course. Actually, Ethan, there's something I want to ask you. What? Would you like Uncle Frank to be our family friend forever? Ethan looked confused. Isn't he already? Robert laughed. Yes, he is. But I want it to be official. I want him to be like a pretend grandpa for you. A pretend grandpa? Asked Ethan, loving the idea. Yes. Someone who'll always be here when you need him, who'll teach you cool things, and who's part of our family, even if he's not related. Ethan looked at Frank with hope. Uncle Frank, do you want to be my pretend grandpa? Frank was deeply moved. It would be the greatest honor of my life, Ethan. So, will you be at my 5th birthday party? If you invite me, I'll be there. And will you make a metal cake? Ethan joked. I'll make a giant robot just for you. Everyone laughed, and Frank felt he'd finally found a way to be important in a child's life again. The next day, Jennifer arrived in New York City. Frank met her when Robert brought her to introduce her to Ethan at the shop, a neutral place where everyone felt comfortable. Jennifer was a beautiful woman, around 30, with the same expressive eyes as Ethan. When she saw her son, she started crying before she could even speak. Ethan, my love. Mommy. The reunion was emotional. Ethan remembered his mother more than anyone had imagined, and Jennifer was clearly overjoyed to be with her son again. Mommy, do you want to meet Uncle Frank? He's my pretend grandpa now. Jennifer looked at Frank with curiosity and gratitude. It's so nice to meet you. Robert told me everything you've done for Ethan. I don't know how to thank you. No need to thank me. Ethan brought joy to my life. Robert said you have a son too. I do. He lives far away, but we talk often. He must be proud to have a father like you. I hope so. Jennifer spent the whole afternoon at the shop, listening to Ethan tell her about his adventures with Frank and watching Robert interact with their son in a loving and attentive way. It's amazing how much you've both changed, she remarked to Robert privately. Frank made me understand what really matters. And what matters? Being present, truly present. In the weeks that followed, the new family dynamic settled in. Jennifer stayed temporarily in the apartment Robert had rented, but spent most of her time at the main house with Ethan. Robert drastically cut back on work trips and began delegating more responsibilities to focus on his family. Frank's shop became a regular gathering place for them. Ethan kept visiting almost every day, Sometimes with Robert, sometimes with Jennifer, sometimes with both. "Uncle Frank, my parents are dating again," Ethan announced one day, all smiles. "Really? And you're happy about that?" "Very. Now we'll be a complete family again." Frank watched Robert and Jennifer talking quietly near the shop entrance. There was affection between them, but also caution. Signs of two people rebuilding a relationship with maturity. A few months later, Robert showed up at the shop with an unexpected proposal. "Frank, I have an idea I want to discuss with you." "What idea?" "I want to open a rehabilitation center for children with special needs. A place where they can learn practical skills while getting physical therapy." "Sounds interesting." "I want you to oversee the metalworking shop at the center." Frank was surprised. "Me?" "You. Ethan gave me the idea. He said if all kids could learn cool things like he did from you, they'd be happier. But I'm not trained to work with special needs children. You have something better. You have heart, and we can arrange the technical training." The offer was tempting, but Frank had doubts. "What if it doesn't work out?" "If it doesn't, you go back to your workshop and lose nothing. But if it does, you could help dozens of kids like Ethan." "Can I think about it?" "Of course. But don't think too long. Ethan's already planning the first lesson." That night, Frank called his son Michael in Boston and told him about the offer. "Dad, this is an amazing opportunity," Michael said. "You think so?" "I'm sure, and you know what else?" "What?" "I'm thinking of moving to New York City next year. I finished college and want to be closer to you." The news moved Frank deeply. "Really? Really?" "Mom agrees. She said it's time we rebuild our relationship in person, not just over the phone." "Michael, you have no idea how happy that makes me. And who knows, maybe I can even help at the center you'll run. I studied physical therapy." "That would be perfect." The next day, Frank gave Robert his decision. "I accept the offer." "That's wonderful. Ethan will be thrilled. But I have one condition." "What?" "I want to keep my small workshop too. It means a lot to me." "Of course, in fact, the workshop could be part of the center. We can set it up right here in the neighborhood, with your workshop as the heart of it." The idea of growing without losing his roots made sense to Frank. 6 months later, the Sparky Rehabilitation Center opened. The name had been Ethan's idea, honoring the robot Frank made for him. The opening was a small but meaningful celebration. Ethan, Robert, Jennifer, Margaret, who'd become a constant presence in the family, Michael, who'd moved to New York as promised, Mrs. Wilson, Mr. Thompson, and several neighborhood children were all there. "Uncle Frank, are you happy?" Ethan asked. "Very happy, Ethan." "Why?" "Because I turned my pain into something that can help others." "How?" "Missing my son taught me to cherish the time I have with other special kids like you." Ethan processed this with childlike wisdom. "So bad things can turn into good things?" "They can when we learn from them and use them to help others. Like my wheelchair." "How so?" "My wheelchair let me meet you. If it hadn't broken, I'd never have come to your workshop." Ethan's observation was profound and true. If he hadn't shown up that day with a broken wheelchair, none of what followed would have happened. "You're right, Ethan. Sometimes what seems like a problem is really an opportunity in disguise." During the celebration, Frank looked around at the people nearby. Robert had become a devoted, caring father. Jennifer was a dedicated mother making up for lost time. Ethan was a happy, confident child surrounded by love. Michael was building a new life in New York and rebuilding his bond with his dad. Margaret finally got to be the grandmother she'd always wanted to be. "What are you thinking about?" Robert asked, walking over. "I'm thinking how funny life is. A year ago, I was just a lonely welder in a small workshop. Today, I run a rehab center, have my son back, and am part of a beautiful family. All because of a broken wheelchair. All because of a brave boy who wasn't afraid to ask for help." Robert watched Ethan teaching other kids to make wire sculptures. "You know what I've learned from all this?" Robert said. "What?" "That sometimes we look for complicated solutions to simple problems. Ethan didn't need American doctors or expensive equipment. He needed love, attention, and someone who believed in him. And now he has all that. He does, and much more. The party went on until late afternoon. When everyone had left, Frank stayed alone in the workshop, reflecting on everything that had happened. He looked at the special wheelchair he had made for Ethan, now stored in a corner as a reminder of the early days of their friendship. He looked at the tools he had used to teach Robert how to weld. He looked at the colored wires Ethan always used to make his sculptures. Each object told a part of the story that had transformed all their lives. Outside, he heard the familiar sound of Ethan's chair approaching. But this time, it wasn't just Ethan. Robert and Jennifer were with him, pushing the chair together. "We forgot something, Uncle Frank," Ethan shouted. "What did you forget?" "The story. You never finished the story of the welding night." Frank smiled. It was true. The story they had started at the hospital had never been completed. "Then let's finish it now. Where did we leave off?" "The knight had learned that the princess also knew how to weld, and they were going to teach others," said Ethan. "Oh, that's right. So let's see." The knight and the princess built a magical workshop where all the people with broken armor could go to fix it. But the most important thing wasn't fixing the armor. It was showing people they were brave enough to face any battle, with or without armor. "And then?" asked Ethan, fascinated. "Then they lived happily ever after, helping others discover their own courage." "Just like us?" asked Ethan. "Just like us." Ethan smiled, satisfied. "I like stories that end well." "Me too, Ethan, me too." Robert stepped closer to Frank. "Thank you for everything. Thank you for teaching me it's never too late to start over." Jennifer also approached. "Frank, Ethan has a question for you." "What question?" Ethan came forward with his most serious expression. "Uncle Frank, will you be my godfather?" "Godfather?" "Dad and Mom are getting married again next month. They said I can choose my godfather. I want it to be you." Frank was deeply moved. "It would be the greatest honor of my life, Ethan. So you accept?" "I do." Ethan clapped his hands with joy. "Now you'll really be part of the family." "I felt that way for a long time. But now it'll be official." Robert and Jennifer smiled, watching the interaction between Frank and Ethan. "Frank," said Jennifer, "there's one more thing." "What?" "Robert and I talked, and we want you to be the godfather of the center too. Your name will be on the inauguration plaque. Sparky Rehabilitation Center. General Coordinator Frank Miller. You don't have to." "Yes, we do," Robert interrupted. "Without you, none of this would exist." Frank looked around the workshop that had become so much more than just a workplace. It had become the cradle of a new family, the starting point of profound transformations, and now the heart of a project that would help many other children. "You know what's most amazing about this whole story?" said Frank. "What?" they all asked at once. "It all started with a 3-year-old boy who had the courage to ask for help. If Ethan hadn't pushed that broken chair here that day, none of this would have happened." "So I'm the hero of the story?" asked Ethan, full of pride. "You're the hero of our story, Ethan. And you're my hero, Uncle Frank." "We're each other's heroes." Robert and Jennifer exchanged emotional glances. They had witnessed not only Ethan's transformation, but the transformation of the entire family. "Frank," Robert said, "there's one last thing I want to tell you." "What?" "I reached out to your son, Michael. I offered him a scholarship to specialize in pediatric physical therapy here in New York City." "Really?" "He accepted. He'll start next semester." "Robert, you don't have to." "Yes, we do. Michael will be essential to the center's success. And besides, we want him close. He's part of our family now." Frank was speechless. In less than a year, he had gained not just Ethan, but an entire family that welcomed him as if he'd always belonged. "Uncle Frank, are you crying?" Ethan asked. "I'm crying from joy, Ethan." "Why?" "Because I've learned that sometimes life gives us gifts when we least expect them." "What gifts?" "You. All of you are gifts in my life." Ethan got up from his chair and hugged Frank tightly. "You're a gift in my life too, Uncle Frank. The best gift I've ever gotten." Robert and Jennifer joined the hug, creating a moment of pure emotion and gratitude. When they finally pulled apart, Ethan returned to his chair with a radiant smile. "You know what we're doing tomorrow?" he asked. "What?" everyone replied. "We're going to start teaching other kids how to make the magic of sparks." "And how will we do that?" Frank asked. "Just like you did with me, with patience, care, and believing every child is special." Ethan's simple wisdom perfectly summed up what they'd all learned on this journey. That night, after everyone had left, Frank stayed a little longer in the workshop, organizing tools and preparing for the next day. He looked at the new sign Robert had commissioned, Sparky Rehabilitation Center, where every child discovers their own light. He smiled, remembering the first time Ethan had compared welding sparks to magic. Back then, he'd thought it was just a cute child's observation. Now he understood Ethan had grasped something far deeper. The transformation that happens when two things come together, with the fire of love and dedication. Frank picked up two small pieces of metal and welded them together, creating a tiny sculpture of two people holding hands, one large, one small, like him and Ethan. "Forever united," he murmured, placing the sculpture on a special shelf he'd made to hold the workshop's most precious memories. Outside, the familiar rhythm of Newtown's nightlife carried on. But for Frank, everything had changed. He was no longer just a lonely welder in a small workshop. He was part of a family, the coordinator of a community project, and above all, someone who had learned to turn his own wounds into tools for healing others. The next day, the center would officially open. 5 children were already enrolled for the first adapted metallurgy classes. Michael would arrive by week's end to oversee physical therapy. Jennifer would begin working as the center's child psychologist. Robert would further reduce his work commitments to focus on managing the project. And Ethan would be the center's junior ambassador, the child who showed others that physical limitations don't limit dreams. Frank turned off the workshop lights and headed home, but paused at the door to glance back one last time. A simple yet powerful miracle had happened there. The miracle of two souls finding each other when they needed it most. The miracle of transformation that occurs when someone reaches out to help without expecting anything in return. The miracle of love that multiplies instead of divides. Tomorrow would be a new day, full of new possibilities and new encounters, but today had been perfect. Today had been the day when a story of loneliness turned into a story of family. And it all began with a 3-year-old boy, a broken wheelchair, and a welder with a heart too big to fit inside his own chest. The end. Now tell me, dear listener, what did you think of this story of transformation and second chances? Do you believe true love can completely change lives? Share your heartfelt thoughts about what moved you most in Frank and Ethan's journey. Your opinion means so much to us. Don't forget to leave your like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you won't miss other touching stories like this one.